Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to a special CBTU Town Hall. I'm the Reverend Terry Melvin, the president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. Over the past 2 days, we've had labor shift episodes focusing on the July 20th strike for Black Lives, the 2020 elections, and a personal address from Vice President Biden. We chose this week to do more shows than normal because we felt that the Democratic convention being canceled, it was a perfect opportunity for us to bring Black issues to the forefront. We wanted to make sure we laid out to Vice President Biden, the Democratic committee, and any non-racist Republicans, what the issues are in our community, what is important to us in the upcoming elections, and why we took the position of endorsing Joe Biden over another candidate. We, in a good conscience, could not endorse someone and not be clear about our expectations during the post-election. Tonight is no different. Tonight, we have with us an esteemed panel of leaders. They are fighting tooth and nail right now to make sure working people do not continue to bear the burden of this global pandemic. They have united to demand passage of the HEROES Act and have taken time away from the battleground to join us tonight to talk about a piece of legislation that will give workers much needed support. With me tonight, we have the president of the American Postal Workers Union, Mark Diemenstein. His members are not only under constant assault, but currently face the threat of privatization. They are also the ones who will guarantee we can vote by mail in this November. It is great to have him with us. With him is the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Lee Saunders. Lee graced us last night with the introduction of Vice President Biden, and he made it crystal clear what our priorities are come November, and got a guarantee from the Vice President that we all heard loud and clear that when he's elected, Lee is at the table. Thank you for coming tonight, Lee. Joining us later in the show is the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. Her members are facing the grim reality of forced school openings with zero safety measures or protocols in place. They must deal with the harsh reality that there is no good option. Distant learning is difficult, but in-class teaching can be deadly. Randy will be leaving the front lines to join us tonight, and we're so grateful that we will be having her with us this evening. Now, I could sit here all night and sing the praises of these great leaders, but we're here to handle some business. Now, I'm a political junkie. My problem has been that whenever I'm not on a call, I'm watching the news or reading an article, so I have some understanding of the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act is grounded in America's 5 essentials, the desperately needed measures to keep working people safe and economically secure. We in the movement are calling for worker safety in public services, pensions and paychecks, infrastructure and public schools, healthcare, and the postal service to be saved. But we can't assume everybody has the time to keep up with all these crazy going on. I'm hoping you can all break it down to me and the people watching. What is the HEROES Act and what impact will it have on your members? I'm asking Lee or Mark, whichever one of you want to start first. How's this going to affect your members, the HEROES Act?
Well, Mark, you want to start off?
Oh, go ahead, Lee. Go ahead, brother. It's great to be here.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Glad to be back on the show, but glad to be with my partners, Terry and Mark and Randy. Will be coming on a little bit later on. Look, the HEROES Act simply does this, and you laid out the 5 essentials, but I think that it's important to lay them out once again so everybody understands the importance of this act. The 5 economic essentials adopted and supported by the AFL-CIO are simply this: protect and expand health insurance, keep frontline workers safe, keep workers employed and pensions protected, keep America competitive with infrastructure investments, and keep state and local governments and school districts and the post office open. Those are the 5 essentials that are actually included in the HEROES Act. Now, why are we so concerned about this? Well, it seems, Terry, that everybody has been, or most people have been taken care of. The corporations, they got their money from the federal government. Small businesses got their money, although there were some kinks and problems with that, some games being played, many games being played by the corporations. But state, local, city, county, districts, the post office haven't gotten any money or any support from the federal government. This is the #1 priority for AFSCME to get the HEROES Act passed. It's our first priority, our second priority, our third priority, our fourth priority. And it's simply because AFSCME members, public service workers, are the everyday heroes who provide essential services to the citizens of this country. And they have been going to work, risking their lives every single day, whether it's healthcare, whether it's our first responders, whether it's sanitation, childcare workers, you name it. They are going to work risking their lives, not having the proper PPE, the proper equipment, not having health and safety protections, but going to work because they understand the importance of public service. And they need to have support from the federal government. Now, states and towns and cities and school districts for the past 3 or 4 months have been moving that deck around a little bit so they can continue to try to pay for the services being provided. But states and local governments don't produce or don't make money. The only people that make money is the federal government. And just as the feds have taken care of the corporations, just as they have taken care of small businesses, it is time to step up to the plate, provide unrestricted money to states and cities and towns and school districts and the post office in order to continue those essential services are provided every single day. It is completely unfair to expect that people going to work every single day, risking their lives, the lives of their families, will receive a pink slip. That's exactly what will happen if we don't get the necessary funds, the $1 trillion plus that's called for in the HEROES Act, which has been passed by the House of Representatives and is now in the Senate. So this is a battle that we must take on, and we are doing everything possible to mobilize our members and our allies to make sure that pressure is put on the Senate to do the right thing.
Thanks, Lee. Mark?
Well, Brother Terry, first, before I get started, thanks so much for having me. A big solidarity union greetings to you, to your wonderful founder, Bill Lucy. We're very proud of the work that CBTU does, proud of the Secretary Treasurer, Liz Powell, sitting on your board. And really, it's really important in this moment, maybe to underscore that you're part of making Black Lives Matter in the union movement and in the workplaces, under union contracts, decent pay, equal pay for equal work. So a big shout out to you and to all of your members on tonight and those beyond. I couldn't agree with Lee more. I'm very pleased to be on this town hall with him. And for our members, you asked specifically about our members. So there's a few aspects to that. Number one, postal workers also have children in school, or in this case, out of school. They want to get back to school safely in smaller classrooms and bigger facilities, and don't want those who want to privatize public education be able to use this pandemic to privatize our schools, to enrich online learning companies. But if our kids are going to be in school, they got to be in school safely. Our members use state, county, and city services every day, from sanitation to everything else. So it's very important for our members to make sure that that funding is there throughout, specifically with the postal workers. And we are a very proud, dedicated group of workers, like other essential workers, that Brother Lee was talking about on the front lines in dangerous and challenging times, carrying out our mission of connecting the people, getting those medicines into people's homes, medical information, census information, all sorts of financial transactions, personal, business-wise, and of course, voting information and ballots. So what's happening to us specifically, this is coming down to a question of jobs and service for us, just like it is for the people that Brother Lee represent. The post office does not run on tax dollars. A lot of the listeners may not realize that. It runs on its income comes from postage and the users, and that has to enable the post office to carry out its wonderful mission of universal service to everybody, no matter who we are, where we live, 160 million addresses, 6 days a week, and now sometimes 7. What the pandemic has done to our members, of course, it's challenged our ability to work safely, and we've done a lot of work on that. But economically, the economic crisis has had a huge impact on the Postal Service. And it's not surprising to people out there as the economy was so deeply affected, mail volume was deeply affected. Temporarily made up with packages because people are sheltered in place and ordering more on the internet, but that won't last. And so what's happening is the revenue is projected to have a huge drop. And that revenue then will not enable the post office to continue its mission. And it's projected by the post office itself sometime later this year or next year that they will literally run out of money based on this COVID pandemic impact. So the CARES Act, the HEROES Act, we weren't taken care of. We meaning not just postal workers, but state, federal, schools, and so on. We're not taken care of in the CARES Act back in March. The HEROES Act is an effort to correct a lot of that and make sure that the Postal Service is taken care of to make up for the COVID revenue loss and the expenses that the post office has suffered because of the COVID pandemic, and enable the post office to carry out its mission. So clearly, the $25 billion for the Postal Service in the CARES Act has everything to do with our members. It has everything to do with our jobs. There's also hazard pay in there for all frontline essential workers. Well-deserved. And, Terry, it's not an accident that the pandemic has hit Black and brown workers so hard, because Black and brown workers are on the front lines in many cases of essential work, whether it's the sanitation workers and the transit workers and the postal workers and the grocery store workers. And it underscores that it's truly the working class that makes the world go around. We'll get into later, the Democratic presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, and, our union is in support. But I think he said in his recent economic address that the middle class built the country. That's not true. The working class built the country, continues to make it go, and will continue to build it into the future. And key to that working class has been the role of Black workers, whether through paid or unpaid labor, in building this country. So again, back to the HEROES Act, it's critical for postal workers and everything postal workers do for the people of this country to get the HEROES Act passed, for also the many reasons that Brother Lee has discussed, whether it's our pensions, our health insurance, our right to state, local, county services, our right to public education. So we're on board. I don't know if we got to as many priorities as Lee Day would ask me, but Lee, we will try. But it's definitely a priority of the American Postal Workers Union to get the HEROES Act passed on the Senate side and signed by this administration.
Thanks so much, Mark. Let me go back to Lee for a moment. We hear when we are out telling people that we need more money for state and local governments, and you just kind of laid it out. But many people think that when we say we need money for state and local government, they don't really see where this money goes. Or can you just enlighten the audience, Lee, of what exactly the money going to state and local government? It's not just going to politicians, but it's going to the community. Why do we need that $1 trillion for state and local governments?
It's providing the continuation of essential public services
Right.
all across this country. I mean, every job that you can think of in the public sector that's being funded by tax dollars is now being affected because of the pandemic. And the tax base in the jurisdictions across the country, in states and cities and towns and school districts, is crumbling. It's crumbling because the economy is so bad, and we're in a recession right now. And so I'm talking about sanitation services. I said this before: clean water, first responders, teachers, okay, childcare, all of those kinds of public services. Every public service you can think of, healthcare, those rely upon federal dollars coming in based upon this pandemic, the problems with this pandemic. And we haven't gotten the necessary support from the federal government. Most states' budgets have a new budget year now. Their budget ended June 30th. They are scrambling right now to continue those essential services that citizens of this country rely upon every single day. They may not think about them every day because they think it's natural, but they do rely upon those essential services. And these services will be cut back drastically, if we don't get the kind of aid that we need from the federal government. So we've got to mobilize and organize and educate not only our members, but our communities across the country to get involved and take action and push the federal government and push the Senate and Mitch McConnell to do the right thing. How do we do that, Terry? Well, we do it through member mobilization, phone calls to your senators, phone calls to those governors to put pressure on the senators, talking to our coalition partners, having them do the same thing, putting pressure on the elected officials, saying we need the continuation of essential public services being provided across this country. We've sponsored, the AFL-CIO has sponsored a number of caravans. We're going to have another one where people are going to be promoting the support of the HEROES Act. We're actually running TV ads on major stations, cable stations, AFSCME, AFT, the AFL-CIO did an ad and is doing ads in Kentucky. We're doing things to not only educate the public, but say that you've got to make your voice heard because you rely upon these public services every single day. 84% of Americans believe that states and cities and towns and school districts should receive federal dollars to help them in this pandemic crisis. Just as corporations receive money, just as small businesses receive money. 84%. People on the progressive side and people on the conservative side, economists, believe that this is absolutely necessary. That if you invest in state and local government economies, everything that you invest, the money that you invest results in $1.70 return upon the dollar. So people understand that this is an important piece of legislation. It's up to the Senate to pass it and pass it quickly. Now they're in deliberations, they're talking about it, but they've got to come to the table and they've got to treat this very seriously. And it's up to us to pressure them in every way possible to consider the HEROES Act and do the right thing.
Thank you, Lee. Let me just bounce over to Mark for a moment. We're in a pandemic situation right now. People do not want to stand outside, be close to each other, many folks, I should say. And in many cases, it's a dangerous situation. We've seen where governments have opened up and the spread of the coronavirus has just escalated. We've got a major election coming up in November. And a lot of us are pushing the vote by mail provision that most people have the opportunity to vote by mail to make sure that their vote is counted and they don't have to put their life in danger to go vote. So what impact would not getting the sufficient funding from the HEROES Act have on voting by mail?
Well, Terry, it would definitely have an impact. But before I get an impact talk about the impact, let me first agree with you on how important vote by mail is. Even before this pandemic, we have been big proponents of vote by mail, and tens of millions of people have already used it. And it goes back generations. Our military personnel have been voting by mail for generations, and it works. It's safe. It's trusted. You have states like California, which by itself would be, I think, the 8th biggest economy in the world, where half the people voluntarily vote by mail. You have 5 states where it's by law. And in those states, participation is the highest. And by the way, no fraud. Oregon has had vote by mail for 19 years, over 100 million ballots cast, and 15 cases of fraud. That's less than one a year. But what you're touching on in this moment is very important, because actually the pandemic is creating the situation where vote by mail will enable tens of millions of people to have access to the ballot box, a hard-fought, cherished, and continuing struggle around our right to vote. If you looked at Wisconsin, Terry and all, 180 polling places normally would be open in the city of Milwaukee. 5 were open during the pandemic. You talk about voter suppression. And the people that came out were putting their lives on the line. And people got sick. They got COVID, some people exercising their right to vote. So if mail is undermined by the post office not being vibrant, not having this emergency funding to make up for the COVID impact, not only could it affect this election, it could affect many elections going forward. The new Postmaster General, only been in a month, has just implemented some policies that's aimed at slowing down mail. You slow down mail, you affect everything we do. It runs counter to everything a postal worker believes in. We believe in service. We believe in treating the mail like our own. We believe in what the law says: prompt, reliable, and efficient services. Prompt means speedy. And you slow it down, it affects everything, and it certainly affects balloting. So we are huge proponents, and we unite with all of the organizations like yours, the AFL-CIO, civil rights organizations, and many rural organizations throughout the political spectrum understand how important the post office is to their access to the ballot box and vote by mail. And if you add in that there's so many communities that have more vulnerability to COVID, seniors, and of course a lot of poll watchers are retired seniors, people that face physical challenges. All vote by mail helps open up that access to so many people. And those who argue against it are those who want to go back to the founding fathers, when who had the right to vote? It was wealthy white landowners and nobody else. No women, no working class whites, no African Americans, period. And those are the people. Anybody railing against vote by mail really is railing against people's right to vote. So this has become a voting rights issue of our moment, and it's very much tied in to keeping the post office vibrant, and it's very much tied in to the civic role that the post office plays in relation to all communities, and in this case also some very specific relationship to communities of color, where voter suppression has often been the greatest.
Thank you so much. With the HEROES Act, under the CARES Act, many of the citizens of the country, unlike our sister country up north, many of the citizens of the country received a $1,200 check. That was it for the CARES Act. Is there anything in the HEROES Act to help regular old people out here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what they're talking about with healthcare support, if you look, and they're talking about providing maybe some more assistance to individuals below a certain salary level or a benefit level. So there will be support for seniors. There will be support for people of color, relying upon those essential services that I've talked about. I think that the House did a great job as far as putting together the priorities that people must have based upon the virus, based upon the pandemic that is affecting their livelihoods and affecting their families every single day. The problem, Terry, is that the Senate's not treating it seriously right now. I mean, the House passed this, almost 2 months ago. And the Senate now is starting to talk a little bit about it, and not seriously, and trying to put some restrictions on what the House wants to do. So again, that's why it's so important that we do what we do best, meaning labor and our coalition partners, and that is putting heat on these politicians, whether they're Democrats or whether they're Republicans, putting heat on them to say, we need support, we need help from the federal government. The federal government cannot ignore this problem. They have a responsibility to provide support and help to every citizen of this country. And we're going to continue that. I mean, through the ad campaigns, through digital advertising, through making those phone calls and sending those letters in and having the caravans and organizing in the streets until the Senate treats it seriously and passes a bill that will benefit working families all across the country.
And Lee, thank you for pointing that out. I mean, one of the things that I think is so important that we let the public know, and those within our ranks and those our family members and friends, that this is one time of many, but this is one time when labor is standing up for the HEROES Act, which is going to affect everybody. This isn't a union issue. This is a worker issue. This is a rank and file person issue. This is an everyday person that lost their job issue. And we are standing up as labor, fighting for this tooth and nail. And people have to understand who we're fighting against. And I'm glad that the two of you are bringing this out, that it is so important that people don't take it for granted that there's steps that we as citizens have to take. And I think that, laying it out, Lee, as you did, about we've got to start calling our senators, whether they're friend or foe. Friend is support, to let them know we're supporting what they're doing, and foe to let them know we ain't happy with what they're doing. And there's repercussions from that. Let me just ask a question to the two of you. We've taken hits in the labor movement, and with some truth, that to standing on the sidelines when it comes to people of color and the LGBTQ plus community. And I understand that the HEROES Act, as Lee, you laid out some of it, helps our members, but how does it help the minority communities? I mean, how is this act that we're pushing help people that look like me but don't happen to be in a union?
Sorry, let me take.
Go ahead.
Lee.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can answer or try to answer that at least through the lens of, let's say, the post office and postal workers, and obviously it's a bigger lens than that. But on three fronts, the post office, especially since 1970, the historic postal strike of 50 years ago, and unlawful strike that workers won. The post office has been a great source of jobs for workers of all nationality, Black workers included, equal pay for equal work. The post office is approximately 25%, the workforce is approximately 25% African-American. It's about 40% minority. It's, at least in the crafts that we represent, it's majority woman. So just on that front, again, it's a piece of Black Lives Matter, that there's decent jobs and equal pay for equal work, less discrimination. I'm not going to say there's none in the post office, but far less discrimination, thanks to the work of the union and collective bargaining. And that's true throughout the union movement in this period. Hasn't always been true. in all aspects of the union movement in a historical sense. They were unions that had discrimination clauses built into their constitutions. But in this moment, certainly the post office has been a great source of unionized jobs for all communities, including the Black community. So that's on the job front. On the community front, it's a small d democratic right to have uniform, universal postal services. Universal in the sense that we must go, and it's a right we're fighting for by law. We must go to every address, no matter who we are, no matter the color of our skin, no matter our income, no matter where we live. And it opens up that right to everybody. And so that's something that serves the minority community, the ability to get medicine. 90% of VA medicines go through the mail. Much of e-commerce and access to e-commerce goes through the mail. This administration, the Trump administration, has an open agenda. It's their agenda, not mine. I'm not making it up. It's in writing from them that they want to privatize, i.e. sell off the postal service to private corporations, which would mean whether people get mail, whether people get packages through the post office, which is the low cost, reasonably priced anchor, whether there's surcharges, whether they want to deliver to the Black community in an urban center or the most rural community in another part of the country, would all be determined on whether somebody can or thinks they can make a quick buck. So that's another aspect on the community front of how important the HEROES Act is to the post office, and the post office is to the people of the country. And I think Brother Lee has talked about so many other essential services that are critical to communities of color. And the third point we've already touched on, which is that the relationship of the post office and the civic role in society, particularly as it relates to access to the ballot box and the right to vote.
Thanks, Lee.
Let me just add to something that Mark talked about, and I'll make it a little personal. But let me just make this statement first. The public service jobs that are in jeopardy right now because of the lack of support from the federal government and what's happening because of the pandemic and the economic tax and the tax base crumbling in states and cities across the country, those jobs that will be lost will have a disproportionate impact on African Americans, period. Okay? Because public service has been a way for African Americans to have a seat at the table, to have decent wages and benefits historically. Now, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and Mark will associate with this one. When I was growing up in the African American community, you had three ways to be able to provide for your families well for a lot of folks, meaning African Americans. It was either working for the city bus system, and that's what my father did. He was a city bus driver, a good unionized job and he was a proud ATU member, okay? He was actually a steward and an active retiree when he retired. Then there was the post office. The post office in Cleveland employed a lot of African Americans, and because of the union representation, they had a seat at the table and they could provide food for their families. And the third area, and when I say bus drivers too, I want to include the public service, expanded beyond bus drivers. The third area in Cleveland was working in the steel mills or the rubber mills, where African Americans worked in those industrial settings. And once again, the connection to all of those areas that I'm talking about, guess what? All of them had strong unions. They had a seat at the table, decent wages and benefits based upon sacrifice and based upon fighting and making your voices heard. That all is in danger right now, based upon our unfair economy, the systemic racism that exists in this country. And that's why it's so important that the Senate deals with the HEROES Act and moves money to states and cities and towns and school districts to continue to employ those everyday heroes that are providing those essential services, many of them African American.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. We're rocking and rolling now. I mean, it's gotten hot and heavy now. And this is what this is about, is really trying to my brothers, is really trying to educate our members and the folks that are watching us today on what this HEROES Act really means to the everyday person out there, to the rank and file member, to the person that don't belong to a union. This HEROES Act has something in it for everybody. And it is doing something different. It is not taking care of the elite as what happened with most times when we have a problem. We take care of the elite and forget about those everyday people. And this HEROES Act is not doing that. It is not doing that. So what are the concrete steps that the two of you, and we'll start with you, Lee, on this one. The concrete steps, we talked about calling our senators, but we see a movement going on in this country. How do we tie this movement for Black Lives Matter that is in the streets in almost every city in this country? How do we tie that movement of young people that have moved us from complacency in many cases to action? How do we tie the issues of getting the HEROES Act passed with this surge of momentum that is going on?
Well, the first thing I think we've got to do is welcome folks that are frustrated, folks that are very angry, Black Lives Matter and other community partners. We've got to welcome them into the tent and sit down and talk with them about how we can move this country forward and how we can deal with the issues that they are raising right now. And the most important thing we can do, Terry, I believe, is not just talk at them or talk with them, but we've got to listen to what they have to say, because they have a fresh and different kind of perspective that we should deal with, and we should treat it very, very seriously. And bringing people together and educating one another about how there is a connection. You know, in 1968, when Dr. King was in Memphis, gave his life, he understood the connection between civil rights and human rights and worker rights, economic rights. All of those are connected. You can't separate those. And we've got to reconnect those rights for everyone, everyone. And right now, there is no question, because of the systemic racism that exists in this country. There's as far as housing, as far as jobs, as far as transportation, as far as education, as far as healthcare, there is a problem that we have got to deal with. And I believe that labor has a special place in dealing with that, because we have the ability to bring people together and talk about the issues that impact on all working families of all colors. And that's what we must do. We cannot run away from this challenge. And this is the moment in time, I believe, where we can really do some things in a positive way that will move this country forward.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, I think Brother Lee said it very well, so I'm not going to try to add much, except the one addition, and I don't think he would disagree, that we also have to be willing to not just listen, but at times follow, and at times take the lead from others, or certainly some of the lead. Terry, it kind of gets maybe to the end a little bit. I don't want to rush to the end, but when we talk about the 2020 election, I think it's very important, as much as I think people who are listening in understand, as much as our members understand, that the significance of this election of unseating a president that wants to destroy 600,000 living wage unionized postal jobs, good jobs in the essential public sector, city, county, state, school systems, and so on, that we can't look at the election as the end of electoral work, that we have to build a movement. And if we look at our history, we've had problems through Democratic and working people have had problems. Black working people, communities of color have had serious problems throughout all the administrations in my lifetime. And I'm not a spring chicken anymore, in case your viewers haven't noticed. You know, the minimum wage is a poverty wage. Hasn't been changed for decades. Police brutality is not a new phenomenon. What's new is cell phones that record it. And so I think it's just really important as this election is, that we don't lose sight of that movements move Congress, not the other way around. And that ties me back into the question about the movements in the street now. Movements move things, and it's already happening. These Confederate monuments have been up there for decades, if not 100 years in some cases. All of a sudden, state legislators are signing legislation to take them down. They didn't do that a month ago, or 2 months ago, or 3 months ago. There's movements already successful in some areas to take the overfunding, the huge billions of dollars into police departments, and shift some of that money into the needs of the community. The movement is making that happen. And as we go forward, I think one of the lessons we learn, and by the way, that's the labor movement has moved history forward, the civil rights movement, the women's movement. It's always been the movement that have moved legislation. So I think if the viewers believe that if we unseat Trump and we elect Joe Biden as president, our problems are solved. I think we're going to be in for another rude awakening. If we unelect one of the most anti-union, anti-worker, anti-people, anti-Black presidents in modern history, and replace him, which he needs to be replaced, we're going to have to work hard to then win our goals. And we're going to win our goals through continuing that movement of unseating that president into motion to make sure that whoever we elect at any level from any party has to respond to the needs. And I think Lee is absolutely right. That connection between labor and civil rights is so key. And his union, AFL-CIO, was really at the heart and soul of this with the sanitation workers strike in Memphis of now I guess it's 51 years ago, Lee, which really was the epitome of that connection. And that was a bitter but successful struggle of movement.
Thank you so much, both of you, with that. I've got my marching orders now. I'm going to make sure that we send this stuff out to our membership and mobilize them. We have to keep the pressure on all these politicians, especially after they get elected. I really feel like we took our foot off the gas after Obama. I mean, we elected Barack Obama, and many of us got comfortable. As I said for years, we went home and we put our feet up and we said, we've elected the first Black president. Everything is all well. And we didn't go in and we didn't push him. We didn't push our agenda. We just left it out there thinking that he would just do it himself. And thank you, Mark, for pointing out that we have to put as much pressure on whether we have a friend or a foe in leadership. And when we elect Joe Biden in November, because I don't think I can make it past November if we don't, but when we elect Joe Biden in November, we have to hold him accountable for the things that he has told us that he is going to do, which is just the opposite of what the current occupant in the White House is doing now. But, and you started on this, Mark, but what, over the last 2 days, this is the third day in a row that we've done a labor shift program, as I said earlier in the show. And at the end of each show, I ask the guest the same question. This is a pivotal time in our history as a country. This is a time when we've seen unprecedented people marching like they haven't in decades. We have a president that is openly against many of the people in this country, a president that when we're going through a pandemic does not try to bring the country together, but try to further divide the country. We're in rough times in this country. We are looked at globally as the laughing stock when we were the global leader. just 4 years ago. Why, from your estimation, is the 2020 election so important? And is it just the White House? Lee, I want to start with you on that.
Well, I'll answer the last question first. It definitely is not just the White House. It is the White House. It is the Senate. It is the House. It's mayors, it's governors, it's county commissioners, it's city councils, it's school districts. It's all of those kinds of things. We've got to be active at all levels, at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And it's important to mobilize and organize, number one, based upon the fact that, and Mark said this is a bad dude, man, that's in the White House. Evil, bad for working people, bad for people of color, bad for working families, and we have got to do everything that we can to replace him and have Joe Biden to be the next president. But that does not let us off the hook, because we have a tendency to say, okay, we did it, job is done. We'll kind of sit back and relax, and 2 years will pass, 3 years will pass, and then we'll look up and say, well, wait a minute. Some of those things we were talking about never happened. We've got to hold folks accountable from day one. And they've got to continue to hear our voices every single day. You made these promises, live up to these promises. You were listening to what we had to say. You wanted our support. We expect you to support us. And so we can't let anybody off the hook. And we have a tendency to do that. And I know Mark preaches this at the AFL-CIO, where we let folks off the hook. And our job is never done. We've got to get Trump out of that White House. I think we've got to, in fact, I know we've got to flip the Senate. We've got to hold on to the House. But when we've got new faces there and we think they're our friends, we still got to hold them accountable. And we've got to push them just as we would push anybody else to support working families and the issues that we care about. This is the time and this is the place. So we've got to do all of the things that we normally do in a political cycle, in a political campaign. Now we've got some restrictions because of the coronavirus, so that means we're going to have to use digital more. We're going to have to use phones more. Probably won't be able to knock on those doors like we have in the past. If you were going to knock on the door, people wouldn't answer, and I don't blame them. But we've got to do all those kinds of new communications mechanisms and devices to ensure that we get the people out to vote. But once that takes place, and once we win in November, the battle is not over. We've got to continue to fight. We've got to continue to push for the issues that we care about. And we've got to continue to hold our friends who we get into office accountable. And also tell them sometimes if they aren't accountable to us and our needs, there will be a price that must be paid.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark.
Well, Terry, I'll start with the second part first too, and add to what Brother Lee said. It's not just the White House, but really the problem is Wall Street and the corporate power that dominates this country. And whoever gets elected, and our executive board is supporting Biden for president for the obvious reasons, if nothing else, right? The obvious reason that we have a president that wants to do away with our jobs, do away with our public institution, attack the public good on every front. But that doesn't change the power relationships that we have to have a movement powerful enough to overcome. And let's just look at the decades of history. And I think that we would probably all agree that it's a corporate dominated society. And that's the challenge, that those power relationships are the challenge that we face. How do we change it to put more and more power in the hands of working people? And unions are part of that path. And less power in the hands of this corporate domination. In terms of the election, let me just say this. I think crisis also brings opportunity, Terry. And this is a tragic pandemic and huge economic, not just tragic health-wise, which is huge, but tragic in terms of its economic. And 45 million people suddenly unemployed. people choosing between medicine and food, people getting kicked out of their homes, people actually going hungry because they don't have the wherewithal in this pandemic to even eat. Kids that are used to getting 1 or 2 meals a day, and sometimes the only meals they had at school, not able to get those meals as hard as I noted that the teacher unions and some governments have worked to continue those food programs even while schools are closed. But some of it's an opportunity to reimagine and then fight for it, because I don't want to just imagine something and then not fight for it. I don't want to dream for something and not fight for it and win it. But it is an opportunity to reimagine the world we live in and the society we live in. The CDC said to workers, if you're sick in this pandemic, stay home. It's good for you and good for everybody else. That's all well and good. I agree. But if there's no paid sick leave, what do? You have to go to work. So what about paid sick leave as a society? You spoke, Terry, briefly about our neighbors to the north. The pandemic hit our Canadian brothers and sisters hard as it hit us in many ways. But not one Canadian person had to worry about whether they were going to lose health insurance like tens of millions of workers and all their dependents lost in this crisis. So let's reimagine how we're going to have healthcare for all in this society. And that ties back to what we do during the election and what we do afterwards to reimagine what I like to call a more collective approach to the society, and one which we really are, which is really part of our union DNA. We're really our brothers and sisters keepers. So it is a key election. You know, President Trump is a demagogue, and demagogue like Hitler and Mussolini play on real fears and real concerns of people with a kernel of truth here and a kernel of truth here. And then they rule in the most vicious way by dividing us up. Native born from immigrant, white from black, gay from straight, straight from gay. All of those things that keep us divided and therefore keep us helpless when we're dealing with a power like Wall Street, and then their representatives, who at times we even get representatives like Trump. So you know, it's to me, you know, and not everybody may agree with me, but I think some of what we're facing is whether this country is going to go down a path of fascism like they did under Mussolini in Italy, or whether we're going to be hang on to the democratic rights we have and then expand them. And when the president attacks voting rights, when the president tweets out messages of supporters yelling white power, when the president attacks the public good and the essential services on every front, when the president calls the Postal Service a joke, when the president puts up walls, separates children from parents, and when the president attacks peaceful demonstrators and sends in the military, we got fascism around the corner. And so part of what I think is riding on this election is what path the country's going to go. And if we get it on a better path, we still are going to have a heck of a lot of work to do. But there's no question that this is a pivotal moment, Terry, in our history. And it's a moment that the working class and the trade union movement can play a key role by unifying with each other against that what I call a drive, to others call a drive towards fascism, the fascist tendencies, which is really ruled by terror. And it's really corporate ruled by terror. And so I look at the election also as a fight for our democratic rights, to expand those rights in that fight, and make sure that the promise, which has not been kept and is still out there, certainly fully not been kept, of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So there's a lot riding on this election, and we're all in it together. And
thank you so much, Mark. Now I've got breaking news. As I said earlier in the show, there were three.
You brought the closer in. You brought the closer in, huh?
I brought the closer in. There's nobody that can come in with all this testosterone and straighten us all. We want to we want to ask the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten. Randy, we've been talking about the HEROES Act and how it impacts our individual members. And I want you to just, if you could share with us how this HEROES Act has an impact on your members. And as American Federation of Teachers, people don't know that you have quite a few nurses in your union also. So you have a global piece that you're looking at, not just the problem with the classrooms. Do we open or not open the classrooms? What do we do with these children or not? But you've got many healthcare workers in your ranks too. And the question for you is, what does the HEROES Act mean to your members? And then after you go through that, talk to us about why it's important not just to pass it, but to do something this November. Randy?
Okay, and how long do you want me to talk?
Randy, we're gonna wait till you're done.
And I'm sorry, we are
From you.
competing with my two dogs who are now trying to, here, now you see the other one. First you saw Penny and now you see Bella. Come on. So hopefully they will not speak during this or bark during this. And just try to, come on. Do you want to come here or do you want to stay there? Bella is now waiting for a belly rub. She doesn't want me to talk about the HEROES Act or about our members anymore. She is on strike. She says, enough work. It is time to focus on me. Oh, that's very Trumpian of you, Bella. So look, I love being with my colleagues, and Mark and I have spent a lot of time reading history and thinking about what happens when you have this kind of fascism, this kind of autocracy, where the wealth, where those in power try to create chaos for those who are not in power to be divided and to fight with each other, which is frankly what Trump tried to do this week in trying to divide parents from teachers about school reopening, in trying to divide workers from immigrants, in trying, and trying to do so many things, and trying, frankly, in our own labor movement to try to divide private sector from public sector, construction trades from others. So these are the masters of trying to use division and dissembling in order to have us fighting with each other so that the working class does not actually have the power to have the power of government. And that is exactly what happened in Germany, and that allowed Hitler to come into power. And Mark and I have this, I don't know if it's masochism, Mark, but Mark and I have this sense of every time we hear it, every time we see it, we read every Marcia Gessen book, we read How Democracies Die. But this is the problem. When people see it, it's already too late. And in some ways, and that's why I'm starting with November before I go back to HEROES. In some ways, November is our last shot to actually change this. We know who Trump is. We know what he does. We know he has no empathy. We know that he has no compassion. We know from what he has done in the last few months, he also has no competency. And that today, just take today, when he says, or his press secretary says, science is not an obstacle or should not be an obstacle to reopening schools. What are we back into the Scopes trial, where we no longer think that science is relevant? And you watch when I heard Pence say Trump say that the CDC guidelines should not be obstacles for reopening schools. And I say to myself, thank God I was not Michael Pence's teacher, because the CDC guidelines are how you open schools. But there are going to be tons of people who actually repeat these things as if it is the gospel, because that is the kind of thing that Trump tries to do. That's the danger he's trying to do. Now, I'll get back to the election in a minute, but you see it so squarely in the fact that they have not negotiated the HEROES bill yet. How dare they go on vacation? How dare they go back to their states? Kentucky needs the HEROES Act. Florida needs the HEROES Act. Texas needs the HEROES Act. Every single one of these states are now holding all of the work that the essential workers represented by Lee, the postal workers represented by Mark, the other essential workers, nurses and teachers and food service workers represented by me and so many others. These are the people who have done the work, who have protected us, who have cared for us, who have nursed us, who have engaged us in this whole pandemic. Without them, the anxiety level, the level of deaths, the level of danger in our country would be so much larger than it is. Without having the Postal Service right now, how would we actually have the kind of communications that we have right now? They've been overwhelmed, and Trump wants to kill them. The HEROES Act is a lifeline that creates funding for states and localities and schools so that they can continue doing the job that they've been doing without laying off the thousands of people who actually risk their lives to actually help us survive this pandemic. How dare anyone not think that it was important enough to actually negotiate this? To say instead, as McConnell did, that states should go bankrupt. You know what that is about? Pitting people who work for state government or local government and their retirement security against vital services. That's all that was. And now what they're doing, as there are layoffs, as there's chaos, as there's spiking of COVID, now what they're doing is trying to say, let's pit parents versus teachers. Let's ignore science. Let's try to crowd kids into schools as if they were sardines, not or ignoring and defying the COVID surge, the lack of resources, and the lack of planning in order to get this done in a good way, and pitting education needs of students and safety needs of teachers and students in our communities. What HEROES does is it provides three essentials: continuous unemployment, make sure that workers are safe on their jobs by having an OSHA emergency standard, continues to provide health care to the millions of people that no longer have it, including COBRA benefits free to the people who's to the families of the people who have died. It is a lifeline for the post office, and it is a lifeline for the people that we represent, who have put their hearts and souls on the line, and their reward should not be a pink slip or fearing to go to work. That's the heart of Nancy Pelosi. That's the soul of Nancy Pelosi, putting it all together, getting her members there, and putting it to President Trump and Mitch McConnell, who have turned their back on regular working people in this country. We need to remember this in November. There's probably going to be something that gets negotiated, but it's going to get negotiated out of blood, sweat, and tears. And it will be done in ways that all of us will be pawns to Trump and McConnell's political games. We need to remember this in November. We need a government that is going to actually put working people and work ahead of wealth and ahead of corporate power. We need a government that actually sees the racism in this country for what it is and doesn't say that monuments should be their monuments that represent slavery and represent subjugation. We need a president that actually honors labor and honors the work that we do and our members do every day, and who can reimagine what healthcare should look like, what infrastructure should look like, what public education should look like, and having that ladder. I'm sorry that I sound so intense today, but this is our last shot. And yes, there's going to be repression. There's going to be suppression. There's going to be voter suppression. They're going to do disinformation. They're going to do everything. But look at what happened in Georgia. How many people came out even without having the voting sites they should? Look at what happened in Kentucky. How many people came out in the primary? Look at what happened in Wisconsin. We have to vote as if our lives depend on it, because it does, and work as hard as we can to get that lifeline beforehand. I know CBTU is there. I know my colleagues, my brothers in this are there, but we need to pierce apathy. We need to engage, because our lives and our democracy and our freedoms depend on this election. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
How you really feel about it, Randy?
That was the drop the mic moment. This was the closer. This is what I wish I could say that I planned this whole session, that Randy would come in at the end and put the cap on everything for us. Randy, you did an excellent job. I want to thank you for, I know you've been tied up all day, meetings and just moving and doing the things that you do for your members. And I really want to thank you for being here with us. Thank you for those profound words from all three of you. We need to stay focused. We need to stay vigilant. We need to stay engaged. An old friend of mine always says, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So we got to stay ready. We got to stay in the ready mode. And that's the message that I've gotten from all three of you on this evening. And with that, it is our time has finally come to end. I want to thank our panelists again for joining us tonight. Lee Saunders, AFSCME, Mark Demenstein, poster workers, and Randy Weingarten for putting the icing on the cake from AFT. They are leaders who stand with us. They stand with Black Lives Matter. They stand with a movement that is progressive, that is about all the people, not just some of the people, and I respect them immensely. They are leaders that fight for their members no matter what the obstacle is. And I just want to again thank you so much for being here. This ends a busy week for CBTU. It has always been our aim to use this platform to bring to you educational, motivational, and inspiration for the work that we have ahead. Please know, as we get closer to November, CBTU will be calling all of you to help. This election is critical, as laid out by all three of my guests tonight, and the cap put on it with Randy. Not just for labor, not just for Black people, but for future generations, for my grandchildren and your grandchildren. If you don't change the facets in chief, we are facing a level of authoritarianism I think many of us assume we would never live through. I've done my best throughout the past month or so that we've been doing this webcast to remain secular in all our presentations and discussions. But I'd be lying if I didn't say to you that as a man of God, I need to look at this a little differently. So as we close out tonight, may I say to all of you that I pray that God blesses each and every one of your souls, that God values your work and holds up your sacrifice, that God sees us toiling in the earth but smiles because he knows that we are planting seeds. In these dark times, may you find strength in God. And for those of different faiths and beliefs, may you find strength in your source. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our regularly scheduled labor shift, Tuesday, July 28th from 6 to 7 p.m. Stacey Abrams will be one of our panelists, so I hope that you will tune in with us at that time. So at this time, as we close, may you have a good night. God bless you, and thank you for tuning in. And once again, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Solidarity forever, everybody.